because we can see from this that what we do to the landscape has everything to do with how that water behaves. So here on the field where we've got tillage every single year compared to something that has been in no-till, what's our difference here on what's running off? So we got a little bit of runoff here. What's the magnitude of the runoff difference right there? We got 5 or 6 times different volume,
At least 4.
roughly. Okay. So when we're losing water, what else are we losing with it? Okay, we're losing soil, nutrients, any residue that might be there. There's a little bit hanging out. It's moving downhill too. Okay. Then when we get over here to the continuous grazed pasture, everybody thinks that all pasture is created equal, that it all infiltrates just nice. Not necessarily so. Okay, a continuous grazed pasture where the animals are on there for a long period of time, there's a lot of what I call cowpaction going on. Okay, so they're squeezing out the air spaces, they're breaking down soil structure. When we went to dig out the sample for this, it took a little bit of effort to get the sample out because it didn't have that nice, good granular structure to it. When we come over here to the well-rotated and recovered, there's a little bit of water there, but what do we not have in there? No soil. It's clear. If you wanted to drink out of this, you probably could. I don't know if you'd want to drink out of that one right there or that one. So grass has a tremendous healing effect for being able to stabilize that soil. Now let's look at what soaked through. So on our no-till, so here is what actually came through. Here's what ran off. Okay, now we put down an inch. The rest of the water is still sitting inside this pan. So that soil has done a pretty good job of holding on to water, and we've gotten just a little bit coming through. All right, so that's pretty good. Now let's look at the continuous till. There's not a drop of water in there, folks. Not a drop. Okay? So when we're tilling and we're constantly disrupting that soil ecosystem, not only are we getting a lot of runoff, I mean, look at this. Here's what came off. Here's what came through 2.5 inches. Nothing. Now, I'm going to do a little something different here. And I'm going to see how close the water came to the bottom of that pan. So it came right down to the edge. This stuff is still a little bit moist, just a little bit. I've seen examples where it's been dry on the bottom, but you know, you guys have had a lot of rain here recently. If it would have been like, you know, a week or two since the last rain, that most likely would have still been dry on the bottom. Okay, now we come over here to the continuous grazed pasture. So here's what came through, here's what ran off. So some still came through, and then on the well-recovered, well-rotated pasture.
Got land action.
The pun.
That's bad.
So you don't have land action here.
So is that okay that has went through the soil profile? I mean,
This here?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We want that.
We can get
So-
it back.
So the thing is, when you look at,
Things just got woolly.
okay, just really briefly, I talk about annuals versus perennials. Okay, annual plants put their resources into above ground growth and seed production. An annual plant is like a college student on a binge, party hard for tomorrow we die. Okay, they're not thinking about the future. Okay, that's how I like to compare it. A perennial plant is a person who's trying to save for a rainy day. So they're investing, and they're willing to withhold some instant gratification to be able to plan ahead and survive in the long term. And that's what a perennial plant does, because when you look at a perennial plant and you look at the root biomass underneath a perennial plant versus an annual, there is no comparison. And I realize we're in an area that is predominantly annual plants. So you guys are operating, looking probably closely at those two left trays right there because you're in a cropping system. But what I wanted to also be able to show you is that there's no question what no-till and some covers can do compared to conventional tillage, till, and no diversity, no cover crop in that system. Striking contrast on how that water is behaving. When we get into a perennial system, not all pastures created equal. This pasture here can eventually look like this with some time. But it's this, if you've got tall statured grasses on soil with animals that are being grazed on top in a pattern that mimics the way that bison grazed historically, there is no other way to build soil organic matter faster than that system right there. No system of annual cropping will beat it, because that's how the grasslands of North America were built, was with tall stature perennial grassland plants with herbivores bunched in a tight pattern, moving like the bison did. Yes?
So the organic matter is coming from all the below ground mass, not the above ground.
About 30% of it comes from above ground biomass, okay? But 2/3 of the organic matter comes from below ground biomass. So those perennial plants, they have what's called annual root die-off, where about 50% of those roots will die off in a period of a year. Well, when those roots die off, they become food for soil biology. The soil biology breaks down that root matter and helps turn it into humus.
Oh, where's the clear alfalfa?
Okay, so if we took an alfalfa field.
Could you repeat the question? 'Cause
Okay.
You're not loud enough, Jerry.
So the question was, where would an alfalfa field be in behaving like this? So your alfalfa field is probably going to be somewhere in between these two when you look at runoff versus infiltration. Now, realizing that, you're raising alfalfa, you're raising a single species plant. Anytime you raise a single species of anything, I don't care what it is, it will only occupy so much soil cover. When we walk out there to an alfalfa field, how many plants of alfalfa plants do you have per square foot? So you have a plant here, a plant here, a plant here, a plant here, but you still have bare soil in between. And notice how the grass wants to creep in. That's why, at least out in the West, people only have a field in alfalfa for about 6 or 7 years because the grass starts taking over it. Well, that's nature's way of telling you, I don't want to be a monoculture, I want to have grass in there. So we have to realize that when nature tries to do something for free and for nothing, are we paying attention to what nature's trying to do? Maybe it's trying to teach us a lesson. And maybe we need to look at how we can synergize and work with nature rather than trying to force the system. So when we look at single species plantings, you're always going to have weed issues to some degree or another. When you start getting multiple species occupying the same site, weed issues basically become obsolete at that point, because that's how nature is. If you take a walk out in the woods, if you take a walk out in the prairie, do you see a single species of anything just occupying a large area? It's only us that does that. So in looking at this in the water cycle, being able to go from here to here You know, at one time, Clayton and Glenn's farm was like this. At one time, their soil will have behaved just like that. But over a period of years, and by making some strategic changes to their operation, they now have soil that's actually taking in water and putting it down into the subsurface, where their corn plants, where their soybean plants can get access to it. So that becomes really critical in a drought situation when we don't get those timely rains, because their plants can still stay green and growing, while the plants that are growing in a soil like this start taking stress very quickly. So it's all about the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle and the water cycle are linked. And if we can just remember, what we do to the land affects the water cycle, which also affects the carbon cycle. Whatever we can do to improve those cycles is going to move us on a path to actually start regenerating the landscape. So, questions?